Using OpenStax Calculus Volume 2, we are looking at integration techniques, and in this section, which is 3.2, we are working specifically with trig techniques. So we've worked with sine and cosine and the different powers and the products. Here we're integrating products and powers of tan and secant. So first, we just got a couple of reminders for some of the rules for secant and tan. So the integral of secant squared x is tan x plus c. Secant x tan x is secant x plus c. Tan x by itself dx is the natural log of the absolute value of secant x plus c. And secant x by itself is ln of the absolute value of secant x plus tan x plus c. Here we have the integral of secant to the fifth x tan x dx. How you do this, again, is going to work on the even and odd system, kind of. So I'm going to rewrite secant to the fifth x as secant to the fourth x times secant x. You'll see why in just a second. Integral secant to the fourth x times secant x tan x dx. Now, if I've done that, u is secant x, du is secant x tan x dx. So this is u to the fourth du, which gives me u to the fifth over 5 plus c, which is secant to the fifth x over 5 plus c. All right, so strategies here. If the power of secant is even and greater than or equal to 2, rewrite it by taking 2 off of your power and using secant squared to replace with tan squared x plus 1. If k is odd on the tan, if k is odd and j is greater than or equal to 1, rewrite tan x secant x by taking 1 off the power of tan and 1 off the power of secant and keeping the secant x tan x. So basically what you're doing is you're figuring out whether to write your problem in terms of secant or in terms of tan. If you're going to write it in terms of secant, then your du is going to need to be secant x tan x dx. If you're writing it in terms of tan, then your du is going to be secant squared x tan x, or sorry, secant squared x dx. Okay, so keep in mind you have these strategies here. Let's look. Tan to the sixth, secant to the fourth. So going up here, j is even, yes. K is not odd. K is odd. No, K is even and j is odd. So we're going back to the first one. So if, hold on. Yes, j is even. So we're going to take our secant and break it into secant squared and secant squared. Tan to the 6x times secant squared x times secant squared x dx. Secant squared x is equal to tan squared plus 1. So integral tan x, 6x, sorry, times tan squared x plus 1 secant squared x dx. Integral distribute tan to the 8x plus tan to the 6x secant squared x dx, where u is tan x, du is secant squared x dx. So we have the integral of u to the 8 plus u to the 6 du, which is u to the 9 over 9 plus u to the 7 over 7 plus c, is tan to the 9x over 9 plus tan to the 7x over 7 plus c. Okay? Here's another one. K is odd. So I have tan to the fifth x secant to the third x. Since the power on tan is odd, we're first going to break up secant and tan. So we're going to rewrite as integral tan to the 4x secant squared x secant x tan x dx. We're going to replace secant squared x with tan squared. No, that is not what we're doing. Hold on just a second. Oh, sorry, I had it backwards. We're going to replace tan squared with secant squared x minus 1. And we're going to square it because to the fourth is squared squared. So integral secant to the fourth x minus 2 secant squared x plus 1 times secant squared x times secant x tan x dx. Okay, one more time. We are going to distribute the secant squared, so secant to the 6x minus 2 secant to the fourth x plus secant squared x times secant x tan x dx. If u is secant x, then du is secant x tan x dx. Integral u to the 6th minus 2u to the 4th plus u squared du is u to the 7 over 7 minus 2u to the 5th over 5 plus u to the 3rd over 3 plus c. Plug secant x back in, and we have secant to the 7x over 7 minus 2 secant to the 5th x over 5 plus secant to the 3rd x over 3 plus c. Whoops, my c got a little crazy. All right, how about integrating tan when k is odd and k is greater than or equal to 3? If k is greater than or equal to 3, then we are going to rewrite as tan x tan squared x. Then we're going to rewrite tan squared as secant squared x minus 1. We are going to distribute our tan. So we have the integral of tan x secant squared x minus tan x dx. We are going to break that up. Tan x secant squared x dx minus tan x dx. Here we're going to use this as u and this as du. So we would really have u squared over 2, which is going to be tan squared x over 2 minus the integral of tan x we saw earlier was natural log of secant x plus c. All right, one more before we finish this video. Integration of secant to the 3rd x dx. So we are going to start off integrating this. We'll break up secant into secant x and secant squared x, and we're going to do integration by parts. So secant x, secant squared x, dx. U and dv is what we need first. So our u is going to be secant x. Du would then be secant x tan x dx. If dv is secant squared dx, whoops, x dx, then v is tan x. So integration by parts is u times v. So we have secant x tan x minus the integral of v, secant squared x dx, times du, whoops, I did that backwards, v du, not dv, tan x times du, which is secant x tan x dx. So we have secant x tan x minus the integral of tan squared x secant x dx, which we're going to write as secant x tan x minus the integral of secant squared x minus 1 secant x dx. Distribute the integral of secant to the third x minus secant x dx. We are going to break this up and have, going up here, secant x tan x minus the integral of secant to the third x dx plus, because when you distribute that minus, the integral of secant x dx. Okay? So, secant x tan x is itself. That's my UV. Then, way over here, secant x dx is plus the natural log of secant x plus tan x. And then we bring this guy over here, minus the integral of secant to the third x dx. We did this earlier, where we set our problem, the integral of secant to the third x dx, equal to what we've got so far, plus natural log of secant x tan x. There's a plus in there. Minus the integral of secant to the third x dx. If we add this secant to the third x dx to the other side, then we get 2. So my answer to the integral of secant to the third x dx is secant x tan x plus the natural log of the absolute value of secant x plus tan x all over 2. That's it.